This video is sponsored by Squarespace. If you need a website, a domain, or an online store, make it with Squarespace. Okay, so let me ask you a question. What is the purpose of a portrait? Aristotle put forth the notion that we judge how good something is based on how well it fulfills its intended purpose. So what does a good portrait do that a bad one fails to? One of the most common pieces of praise I hear about portraits is when people say things like, "You've really captured that person's soul," or "That photo really embodies who that person is." I think this is often the general perception of what a great portrait does, but I think this is nonsense. I don't think that one single image can communicate the complexities, nuances, contradictions, thoughts and feelings of a human being. I think at best this is a misunderstanding of what photography can do, and at worst, a deliberate manipulation of how an audience perceives a person or people. To explain the latter a little more, we need to look at Dorothea Lange's iconic image of the migrant mother. In 1936, Dorothea Lange was working as a photographer for an agency called the Resettlement Administration. It was created by Franklin Roosevelt in order to relocate struggling urban and rural families to communities planned by the federal government. Lange's task was to document impoverished rural workers as part of a campaign to gain voter support for government aid. One afternoon, Lange was passing through the Nipomo Valley in California when she happened upon a pea pickers camp. A frost had killed the crops, leaving the pea pickers with no work, hungry and worried in their makeshift homes. It was there where she stopped, and she took this iconic and brilliant photo. The portrait was reproduced in newspapers, telling of this woman who was a 32-year-old pea picker living in a lean-to tent with her 3 children, how she had just sold the tyres from her car in order to buy food for her family and had been living off frozen vegetables from the fields and birds killed by the children. The image went on to become a symbol of the effects of the Depression, as it represented a deep truth about motherhood, about resilience and family and poverty. It connected with voters, and it gained their sympathy, and ultimately helped motivate a relief movement that saved a lot of families from potential starvation. The image has been celebrated over time for its depiction of unrelenting truthfulness. As the website study.com puts it, the portrait demonstrates the sort of intense human emotion that simply cannot be faked. But the problem is that the story that accompanies this image, and is still often associated with it to this day, is not true. The woman, Florence Owens Thompson, was not a destitute migrant pea picker. She was a Native American born in what was later to become Oklahoma. She hadn't sold the tyres from her car in order to buy food for her children. She, her husband and kids were driving to a farm job in California when their car's timing belt snapped. They stopped outside of the pea pickers camp while her husband and one of her kids set off to the nearest town in order to buy a new timing belt. Florence set up a lean-to tent with the remaining children where she waited and cooked food. Now, while the family were fairly poor, they were a lot better off than the destitute pea pickers living on the camp where they'd stopped. But this didn't stop Lange photographing her several times, rearranging and reposing them, until she got the exact feeling she was looking for, making sure she didn't photograph the older daughter, as having too many children may impact negatively on people's sympathy for the mother. She arranged her arm to draw the viewer's attention up to the mother's face, and even had a darkroom assistant remove her left hand as she saw it as a distraction. Here, Lange is a storyteller, presenting a narrative to her audience, and a narrative with a preconceived purpose. Was she deliberately using the misconception that one can look at an image like this and think they see a person's life in it? Was she lying? Is this unethical? It certainly did the job that Lange wanted it to. It was a key catalyst in saving many lives. Was she creating this image in order to simplify a socio-economic problem in order to make it more palatable to people? And is that okay? These are questions that have no simple answers. I don't have the answers and I don't expect you to either. But they're points worth thinking about. So what does all this mean for your own photographic portrait work? Photographing a person is very different from photographing a building or a car or a mountain. You are changing the subject's state a lot more because people are complex and animated and multi-layered. With a building or a landscape, you're interpreting that scene, maybe with added juxtaposition from the angle you're shooting at. But when shooting a person, you are taking a frozen moment of something so vastly complex and nuanced. In a way, you're creating something rather than representing it. When taking photographs of people, portraits are generally posed, and posed shots are just different, not lesser than candid shots. No image reveals a whole person in their entirety. It's just how they are at that particular moment in time. But a lot of interpretation is left up to the audience. We don't know how they're feeling, we don't know what they're thinking. How someone poses in front of a camera reveals just as much about them as a candid shot does. We all project a persona all of the time. Judith Butler, in her book Gender Trouble, describes gender as performance. But I think this performative aspect of our lives extends beyond just performing our gender roles. We are constantly performing our whole cultural identity. To me, a good portrait creates some kind of emotive connection and asks more questions than it answers. It can make me question my preconceived notions of the world or my prejudices. It doesn't fetishise its subject, but rather invites the viewer to challenge their notions of identity. It invites me to look again at the image, and it challenges my view of the world. Ultimately, a portrait gives me insight into myself as much as the subject, and this is why I love portraits so much. Because we are human beings, when we look at other human beings, it's different to looking at an animal or a building or a landscape. We are looking as an equal, and so we look to others to see aspects of ourselves mirrored in their personality, in their beliefs, in their physicality. A good portrait triggers an empathy in the viewer. To me, a portrait is really a story, but just one story. And a story is really just as much about the storyteller as it is about its subject. This is maybe why I connect with the work of Nan Goldin so much, as she documents people over years throughout a whole suite of images. And I connect less with the work of someone like Bruce Gilden, whose work I admire greatly from the sake of a striking aesthetic, but I don't feel it really tells the story of that person. But photography is multidimensional, and this is just my personal take on image making. Yours may be completely different, and mine is no more valid than yours. But when taking a portrait, try not forcing your interpretation into that image, but instead approach it in an open-minded way. Allow your interaction with the subject to dictate a little how the shoot goes, whether this is in the studio or on the street. Unless you're shooting a model for a fashion label or something where you have a specific brief, in which case the portrait will be more about the brand than the subject. But try letting your feelings guide you a bit. Tap into that intuitive mindset and see where it takes you. Hello, I hope everyone's doing okay at the moment. Big thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon as always, and also thank you to everyone who buys my Lightroom presets, because you guys, you keep money coming in, which means that I can keep making these videos, which is really great. If you want to check out my Lightroom presets, there's a link below this video that will take you to my website where you can find out a bit more about them. Big thank you to Squarespace as well for sponsoring this video. Squarespace is an all-in-one web hosting platform. I've been using it for many years, and so do many professional photographers and designers and filmmakers. It's extremely easy to use with simple drag and drop functionality. The templates you can pick from are very nicely designed and they look very slick and professional, but they're also customizable, so it's pretty easy to get the site looking exactly how you want it. There's no software or patches to install, it's all done through your browser, so you can update your site from wherever you are as long as you have an internet connection. You can easily keep up to date with your analytics while you're on the go, or even manage sales through your site, as they offer a range of e-commerce tools. I highly recommend them, but don't take my word for it, give them a try yourself, because they have a completely free trial. And I mean properly free, not one of those trials where you have to enter credit card details and they start automatically charging you if you don't cancel it. You just go to squarespace.com and just start trialing your design. And if you don't want to continue, you just leave it. But if you like it, you can go to squarespace.com/Jamie Windsor to get 10% off of your first purchase of a website or a domain. I'll see you next time.